So a $10 million wrongful death lawsuit was filed against the city of Seattle yesterday. And this is a situation I've talked about here on the podcast. We had a deal where I think it was a 43-year-old dad of 3 kids. He was having a heart attack. So he has his 13-year-old kid call 911. 911 sends out the fire department. They get there within about 6 minutes. Now, the city of Seattle has identified the address to where they're sending, fire and police as the prior tenant. They identify it as an address to be careful with their 911 center because there's been a history in the past of whoever lived there just being belligerent and don't want to deal with this person. So they've got kind of a no-go notice on this address that the kid's calling from, that he needs 911 to come from. So fire department shows up, but because of this incorrect city of Seattle listing of this address, the fire department's got to wait for the police to basically make the scene safe so that they can go in and do their work. So the fire department gets there, they got to wait for the cops. Now, unfortunately, here in city of Seattle, we've got a situation where we don't have enough police, and our 911 call response times, just like down in Portland where they don't have enough police also, 911 response times was so long that the fire department basically has the kid call a second time to 911. Hey, my dad's dying. Can you send somebody? And or can you get the police here? Because the fire department's waiting for the police because they've got to clear out the scene. The police have to clear out the scene before the fire department can go in and do their job. They've got a guy literally dying on their hands there and they can't really do anything. Now there's a $10 million lawsuit, number one, saying, hey, you shouldn't have screwed up on having this address as listed. That person is no longer living there. And the current person probably died because of your mistake as far as identifying who lived there and why it should be a no-go zone. The second issue was that because police response time was like, I think 16 minutes, 15 minutes, 16 minutes, it was way too long. And by the time, they would have waited for that to happen, the individual died and passed away. As it was, after the kid calls the second time 911, the medics just went in there anyway. They didn't follow protocol and they knew the guy was dying. So they went in there and they tried CPR for an hour and the guy had already passed away. So $10 million lawsuit. That's what we're talking about today. And a lot of this has to do with we don't have enough police on the ground to make citizens safe. And this is a direct example of that happening because fire department was able to get there. They got there in like 6 minutes, right? So what if the cops were there at the same time? They can identify, all right, this isn't the individual that has had the issues with police in the past. So plus the police can just make the scene safe. The medics can go in and do their thing like that. Maybe the guy lives. The odds went from like 60% to under 20% for the guy living based on the time frame in which, you're able to get out medics and have them legally do their job. A lot of the same components that went into this wrongful death lawsuit, you're seeing on the first one of many lawsuits against the city of Seattle for not having enough police. So there's another similar lawsuit that has brought about, there's a whole bunch of lawsuits on CHOP. Basically, hey, city of Seattle created an environment where there was no law enforcement in CHOP. But there was also a situation where the first individual, Horace Lorenzo Anderson, age 19, he got killed within the confines of CHOP. And they weren't able to get him to the hospital in time, even though there was an emergency. There was an ambulance a block away. That ambulance had to wait for the police to go in and clear out this no cop shooting zone incident. They couldn't get the police in there. And so there was just this debacle of they wanted to help the kid and they wanted to get him to the hospital. But as it was, I think it was either Black Lives Matter or Antifa, a volunteer group of people took that kid to the hospital, took him to Harborview, took 𝐏𝐞𝐚𝐬𝐴 Anderson to the hospital where he died. And so the issue there was, had police been in that area and able to converge on the zone like they normally would, but because it was a no-go zone, city's got a little bit of liability there. And I think the city has some massive liability on some of these issues because you just don't have enough police to respond. That's what we're talking about today. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies, and I read news that a lot of people say you might not find elsewhere. These are storylines that are going on that I think a lot of people are interested in. You're not going to find them in the mainstream media, and you're not going to find them with anybody who really has an opinion that you might consider to be reasonable. So it's kind of what we're doing. Seattle firefighters waited to treat an ill man who was mistakenly listed as a threat. His family says it cost him his life. So the kid's got 3 kids. The guy's got 3 kids, and he has I think it was the 13-year-old call. Just brutal. You're having a call. Your dad's dying. There's medics there. They want to help the guy. They can't because this deal with the city. A wrongful death claim was filed Thursday against the city of Seattle, seeking $10 million in damages for the children of William Urick, who died from a heart attack in November because his treatment by Seattle Fire Department medics was delayed due to a mistake that had flagged Urick as a danger to first responders, according to the family's attorney. You have 2 things that go wrong here. Mr. Urick was mistakenly on this blacklist. So he had rented an apartment that was previously occupied by somebody who had run-ins with the police, and police were delayed because of staffing shortages. So you got 2 mistakes by the city right there. I think the city's got liability on both of these. So attorney Mark Lindquist said this. He filed the claim on behalf of Urick's 23-year-old daughter and his ex-wife, the guardian of Urick's 3 younger children, ages 5, 8, and 13. So just a crazy scenario. Could you imagine being this 13-year-old kid having to call 911 twice because they can't get there to save your dad, and you're literally just watching your dad stroke out and have a heart attack in front of you, and there's nothing you can do. You've done everything you can do as a 13-year-old kid. I mean, talk about the trauma that kid has undergone. And that is literally what you're going to be seeing in a city like Seattle. If you have a major event go on, say you get another CHOP that goes on, maybe you've got some more protests that go on, whatever it is, major catastrophe, you got an earthquake, whatever, you're going to have situations like this happen because you don't have enough police to respond. And when you don't have enough police response, number 1, you got to get them out there. Number 2, you got to get your information right that has an impact on whether somebody lives or dies, because the medics were, in this case, the medics were out there. So on November 2nd, Drew called 911. He's the kid, called 911 at 1:24. Said his dad was having chest pains and having a tough time breathing. 6 minutes later, the medics arrive. All right. They're there to do their job, but they were ordered to wait for a police escort because Urick was on a blacklist for hostility to first responders. It's not the Urick was, not the individual. It's the address is kind of what it was. And having to wait for the police escort is the same thing that happened in CHOP. The medics were there. They were a block away, but they couldn't go and get the kid that was bleeding out, Alonzo Anderson, because they've got a directive. It's within the rules and the guidelines. If you're in a shootings incident, you got to wait for the cops to come. You got to wait for the police to come and secure the scene, as you do, because otherwise you're just a medic wandering into just who knows what. And I watched the video on a group of people within CHOP that knew the shooting had occurred, and they are pleading with the emergency vehicle driver. Hey, can't you do something? What are you doing? Why he's bleeding out? Why are you letting him die? Well, they've got a directive. I mean, if you're an unarmed EMT guy, are you going to drive right into the heart of a shooting incident and do your thing. I'm just going to cowboy up here and this is going to be fine. You got people screaming, shouting, yelling. I watched the footage on it. I've watched the video. You got to wait for the police. That's protocol. That's what you do. And actually, in the story that I'm focusing on here, the EMTs broke protocol because they had a guy dying right there, and they could see that there wasn't, anything else going on. They could see that the guy having a heart attack, he's not the individual that was purported to have incidences in the past. And, but the list was out of date, and the caution for first responders was related to a previous tenant. So the kid calls 911 a second time at 1:37. So 13 minutes later, and 3 minutes later, the medics decide to ignore the order and wait for the police. They applied a defibrillator and started CPR, but it was too late, and he died in front of his son. Police arrived 15 minutes after the initial 911 call. 15 minutes is too late. It's too late because the medics were there in 6. Had they been able to start right away, had cops, is there not enough police to get there in time? Could have been a completely different story. And that's what this wrongful death lawsuit is based on. I think it hinges on, hey, you don't have enough police, and the city screwed up on this individual's being identified as difficult to work with 911. So I think the city of Seattle they've got some pretty major liability. And then there's also this storyline hit the Daily Mail, and it was on Tucker Carlson, and it was local Jason Rantz talked about it. He's from KTTH. He's another conservative reporter. And, one of the other storylines is our former mayor, Jenny Dirk. She had this vaccine mandate, and we had some police officers quit. And a number of officers in the Seattle area, it's just gone the wrong way. And so this is an example of, here's what happens when you don't have enough cops to make sure that the city is safe. You have one tiny little screw up like this. Cops can't get there in time. And it wasn't even really up to the cops. It was up to the medics to be able to start doing their thing, right? But they didn't have the go ahead. So their hands are tied. Can you imagine being one of these guys knowing that you could help out this guy? You're just watching him die in front of you. I think the city has some liability. Even if just from maybe it's not liability, from a moral standpoint. Hey, you don't have enough cops. You did this, and this. You defunded the cops at one point. You created a working environment where nobody wants to be a cop in the city like Seattle. Nobody wants to be a cop in the city of Portland because of multiple things that have gone on over the last couple of years. And now number of police are at all-time lows, and you've got situations like this, and you're going to have citizens who are going to say, yeah, you know what? We call nonsense on this. We're going to sue. And I think that's what they have to do. And I think in order to get the powers that be that apparently don't really care, for its own citizens, because when you get to a critically low level of police, your public safety just goes sideways. And this is one of those examples where that has exactly happened. Feel so bad for this 13-year-old kid. He did everything he could, but it wasn't enough. And he knows that if somebody just shows up, maybe there's a chance his dad doesn't die. I mean, we don't really know what the situation was medically, what was going on with that dad, but at least get somebody in there working on him and give him a shot. And that was the same thing with the CHOP victim. The first CHOP victim was the kid was bleeding out. From what I understand, the kid was bleeding out, and had they been able to get him to the hospital earlier, things might have been different. Nobody can see what actually happened and what could have happened unless it does happen. You know what I mean? But give that person who's having the heart attack the greatest possibility of living. And that's not a 15 or 20 minute wait until the police get there. That's a hard no-go. And down in Portland, I've read accounts and I've had, emails sent to me that sometimes it's hours before you get a call, not on something as critical as, hey, somebody's having a heart attack. We need you there now. But 15 minutes is an eternity if you're having a heart attack, because you can get the person stabilized. You can get them up. You can get them, out of that critical area where they're just going to go down like this dad did. So just a super sad situation, but the lawsuit, yeah. I mean, in my opinion, I'm not a lawyer, granted. Yeah, not. But I think, the mechanics of this are pretty simple to understand. It took too long for somebody to get there to help. And that's what our taxpayer money goes for. You got to have 911 services. You got to have EMT. You've got to have, you've got to have the police. All of those work together. And in this case, they didn't. And now some 13-year-old kid is going to grow up without a dad the rest of his life. And he's going to have these nightmares in his head of, could you imagine? Just waking up every day knowing that you were the one that made the calls and there was nothing else you could do. So traumatic. Just being 13 years old is traumatic enough, right? Just going to school, waking up every day and going to school at age 13. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're the most popular kid in the school. It's traumatic. Junior high is traumatic. And then you have something like this. Just absolutely horrific. So a lot of lawsuits that I see against the city, they're just so frivolous. This one, I think it's $10 million. Yeah, that doesn't bother me at all. Doesn't bother me at all. And the kid at CHOP, all right, CHOP shouldn't have happened. And from that standpoint, you shouldn't have allowed a lawless area to exist in the first place. And yet city officials did. City council was like, it's the greatest time ever. Our mayor literally, she's probably just, oh God, I can't believe I said that because it's so bad. The Summer of Love, turned into two black kids, black boy, 19 years old, Lorenzo Anderson, and the second kid, 16 years old, killed in CHOP. So it was the Summer of Love until it wasn't. And, we're happy here in Seattle to defund our police. And then we wonder, oh yeah, right. Not enough cops. Ooh, yeah. Right. Because in this case, you can't send out a social worker, can you? No, you can't fund the social workers and have them do the police person's job, because that's a hard no-go. The firefighters, the ones they were going to be doing the CPR, they needed a policeman there to secure the scene. And so this is one of those things where, all right, you get what you pay for. And somebody's dad died. And now there's a lawsuit. So now it's going to go through the courts. So this one will be a really interesting one to watch because, and this is a wrongful death. I think, I got to check here. This is a wrongful death claim. Sorry, this is not a lawsuit. This is a claim. And then after that, I think the city has a certain amount of time to respond. Let me take a look here and see. The city's got a certain amount of time to respond, and then it basically goes to lawsuit territory, and it'll go to that. That's just how these things go. City has the right to settle this out of court. And we have certainly seen enough settlements over the years from big cities like Seattle and Portland on individual things. And a lot of the times I do not agree with those lawsuits because I think it's people who are, they're taking advantage of the system. They're finding cracks in the system and they know that the city has deep pockets. They've got insurance, deep pockets. In this case, I'm okay with that. Because I think this needs to shine a spotlight on a real issue, which is, hey, yeah, maybe defunding the police wasn't the greatest idea. And maybe it's created this situation where these big cities, they're not going to be able to hire cops for a long time. And that puts citizens on basically just, all right, good luck out there. I hope you're doing your thing. And that's literally a lot of what we're seeing we're seeing pot shops had just a rash of armed robberies lately. And so what are the big shops doing? They're hiring their own armed security guards, but not everybody can pay $25 an hour as an additional employee and make that go as far as a business. You've got profit and loss. And if you go into that loss category for too long, guess what? It's just like the Black News channel that just went sideways. They had $50 million in funding and then boom, done. Yeah, you're not creating enough revenue. We're no longer funding you. Not profitable. Boom, done. So you've got these small businesses that can't arm up themselves against, these perceived threats. And situations like this, where you've got a 13-year-old kid, I mean, he's doing the best he can, but his dad isn't living. And arguably it's because, Seattle police weren't able to get there in time. I do not blame Seattle police. I do not blame Seattle police on the CHOP deal. I do not blame the firefighters on the CHOP deal. I don't blame them on this thing. This is a city protocol and how the city has handled basically public safety for its residents in general with a lot of what they've done. It's on them. So, and I know we're trying in Seattle, we're trying to do a number of things to make this better. It's going to take a long time because hiring more police officers, that's going to take a long, long time. So as this storyline goes, I think you will see more lawsuits and you will see more incidences of these things impacting citizens on a real base level. 911, how can I help you? My dad's having a heart attack. Come quick. I mean, that's every kid's nightmare to have to do that. And most kids hopefully never even have to think about that. But I did watch the older sister talking about the phone call of the kid to 911. And she was like, yeah, he had never called 911 before. He made that phone call. I think he did pretty good. My recollection of what she said was, he handled it as well as he could. And then you got to call back a second time. I mean, you would think calling 911 once would do it, right? No, he had to call a second time. And that's when the medics are just like, fuck it. We're going to go in and help this guy. Literally, that's what's in their head. All right. Yeah. This guy's going to die if we don't get to him like now. And he ended up dying anyway. So sad story. But this is kind of just an example of when you don't have enough police to go all around. Another story I just saw was that we don't have enough cops here in Seattle. And so, we've been focusing on these hot spots in downtown. Well, now we're going to take some of the police off of the hot spots because that's been taken care of. But now we're going after retail theft. So we're moving the police from the hot spots. Okay. All right. How's that going to go for the hot spots? Yep. Not good. Not good. And we're going to move the police into retail theft, trying to cover that. Well, you've only got resources for so much, right? So how's that going to look? What is that going to look like? Because if we had enough police to begin with, a lot of this just flat wouldn't be happening. It just wouldn't be happening. And yet policies have been made, decisions have been made on the city leadership level here in Seattle. And those didn't work out all that well. And we are living with the results here. And this lawsuit and the lawsuits going on in CHOP are prime examples of what that looks like long term. So should the citizens of Seattle be really upset with all this? They should. They should. But because it's Seattle, I think a lot of them are just like, this is just what big city. It's just what. No, this isn't what should be happening. This is avoidable. And yet here we are dealing with it. Pretty crazy. Yeah. I hope whatever city that you're living in right now doesn't have this nonsense going on for your sake. Because if your kid or your grandkid or family member needs to call 911, you want somebody to come and help you. That's the whole point of how this game should work. But right here in Seattle, it's not. So let the lawsuits fly. This is one time where I'd say, yeah, I'm on board with that. I can understand that one. I think there's some liability. I think somebody's got to pay, and it's going to be the city. Simple as that. Does that sound reasonable? I think it's reasonable. How much are they going to pay? Don't know. It'll be millions. It'll be millions if it goes that direction. These things take years to work out in the court system. And usually the city ends up settling. We'll give you 3 million, 4 million. Sorry about your dad. That's if they even get a sorry, right? That's it for me on this one. Thanks so much for being here. I'd love to have you subscribe. We'll talk soon. Bye for now.